Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Event Industry News podcast. This podcast is kindly sponsored by N200 GES, our smart event solution partner. For more information on N200 and its smart event solutions, visit n200.com. A very good morning, afternoon, or evening to all of our viewers who have connected to the live stream of today's podcast via eventindustrynews.com. Tonight's live stream will allow you to interact in real time with our guest, giving you the power to put questions directly to them and get your opinions heard. You can also submit questions via Twitter. Just go to Event News Blog. @Event News Blog is the Twitter handle to use for any questions or comment on tonight's podcast. Keep your eye on eventindustrynews.com or download the brand new Event Industry News app, which will keep you notified of all the latest content. So a very good evening to everybody. And in tonight's episode, we're going to be looking at ANDRODES, an immersive cinematic musical journey that utilizes 3D animated film synced to an electronic dance music soundtrack, which is performed live by emerging artist Sartory. The show has already received critical acclaim and will be available for private events very soon. To tell us more about it is the artist herself, Helen Sartory. Helen, welcome along to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
No problem at all. This is fascinating. I've done a little bit of digging on this today before we came on to broadcast tonight's podcast. I've had a look at your social media feeds. I've looked at some of the stuff that you were doing out at South by Southwest on the website. It's a fascinating concept that is very, very difficult to actually understand in just a couple of paragraphs. So why don't we start by telling us about how the concept for ANDRODES came about, first of all, and we can start to look at exactly what it is.
Sure, yes. No, that's a problem I've had forever, which is how do you explain it to someone who hasn't seen it and experienced it and done it? ANDRODES is essentially a story that you dance to. That's the fundamental concept. It's a live music event, it's a dance music event, but there's an inbuilt narrative, there's characters, there's all the types of things that you would come across from a theatre or a film experience alongside live music. So that's kind of the basis of it. It's fusing those two entertainment experiences into one double whammy.
So to paint a picture for people, and I'm sure anybody that's listening or watching this podcast, after they've watched it, they're going to hop straight over to your website or to one of the social media feeds and start maybe getting a picture for themselves of what it looks like. But let's try and paint that picture for them for the moment. How does it look if you come to the ANDRODES experience?
So the ANDRODES story itself is a sci-fi based story. It's based on, all of my favorite sci-fi cliches and movies all kind of smushed together into one. It's the story of a robot who goes on a little journey of self-discovery. She and learns a little about herself. So as an audience member, you will, from the visual side, there's 3D projection of an CGI animated story, which is a musical story. And then the live music itself is performed by, don't want to give any spoilers away, but me, I'm not like this. I'm usually dressed in something that involves a helmet like this, on a giant LED audiovisual console, which I use to create the music live. So part of the experience is, cinematic and narrative, and some of the music experience is more kind of the traditional rave atmosphere, and kind of take the audience through a journey through that.
Let's take a step back then and hopefully continue to build this picture. What's your background as a musician and as an artist?
Sure. I originally was a classical musician, from a very young age. I think I was launched onto the piano at about 3, violin at 5, and at the age of, I think, 10 or 11, I declared that I was going to be a film score composer, and that was what I was going to be. And I dutifully went off to university to study music. Unfortunately, didn't come out with all of the necessary skills I felt I needed to go into film music directly, because there's a lot of modern techniques, and I went to study old-fashioned university and took a detour, eventually ending up in electronic music. And I really fell in love with live music, especially live electronic music, and the new kind of technologies people are using to get away from the decks and really do that live. So I decided that I wanted to take those two worlds and kind of put them together and use everything I learned from my classical training, my training in the short time I did spend in film music and writing music for theatre, and apply that to electronic dance music and specifically live dance music. So that's where we ended up with what I call Cinematronica, this kind of fusion style of traditional house music, electronica, and some of the more narrative-based storytelling tools you can use in film music.
So when you took the plunge and you decided that this was the route that you wanted to go down, how big a gap was there? When did you first come up with the concept for this particular show, for the ANDRODES experience, and how long did it take then from having that first sort of light bulb moment to actually realizing some of the basic concepts behind it?
I think I finally, I knew that I wanted to do something, like I said, it kind of fused those two worlds for a long time. And it wasn't until about almost a year and a half, 2 years ago, where I finally came up with a story that I felt kind of would do it justice. And, I went down this kind of sci-fi robot self-discovery angle. I was probably pretty naive starting out, thinking, it'll be simple. I'll just, make an hour of CGI and I'll make an hour of music and I'll build a suit and I'll build an instrument and off we go. It actually turns out it's a lot more complicated than that. It takes a lot more time and a lot more talent. So, the first 6 months or so was just getting the narrative and the music together before I partnered up with a very talented motion graphics designer called Dan Weiss, who then we started working on the whole aesthetic for the world and, started working on the visual side of it. And then once we had those two pieces, I was very adamant from the beginning that I wanted it to be a live music experience. So I didn't want to be DJing on decks. I wanted to have an instrument that I could play this stuff live on. And that's when I partnered up with a guy called Ben Williams, who specializes in building these custom live performance systems. And we came up with this giant LED crystal-shaped contraption that I can wave my hands at and beat with drumsticks and do all types of things to create all of the live elements. So that whole, from concept to where, when we finally launched in February was probably a good 18 months. And that was a very accelerated 18 months. I think a lot of people didn't think we were going to make it.
And did you have a plan to launch at, I think it was February with the first shows, is that right?
Yeah, so we launched at Vault Festival in London, which is a great place for new formats, new types of live music experience, especially anything immersive. Goes down really well. It's a little bit like London's answer to the Edinburgh Fringe. So it's a bit anything goes. You get a very open-minded crowd, which was great, especially the first few shows of anything that's technically this difficult to kind of sync together. We ran into a few issues, but by the time we got to the end of the run, everything was working pretty slick. So it was a great place to premiere it for the first time and a really, really good set of audiences.
Was it difficult on a technical note to find a venue that was compatible with the elements that you need for the show? So the screen and the actual stage size and being able to set it as you need it to set it?
In actual fact, we probably did it the hard way because we started from scratch. Vault Festival was set in the Waterloo tunnels, so we pretty much just had one giant cave. And we brought in a 20-foot screen, a sound system. We did all our lighting from scratch as well with a very talented lighting designer, Tom Campbell. In retrospect, I probably would have preferred somewhere a little bit less damp because it didn't agree too much to some of our equipment. So that's one lesson we did learn. But it's the type of thing that it's designed for an immersive, site-specific experience. So it's important to be able to build it and take it down in lots of different environments.
Does the audience need to wear anything in terms of 3D glasses, in terms of VR headsets in order to interact with it, or is it designed so that the audience can just be as they are and still experience what you'd like them to?
Sure. In the current version, yes, it's all projected onto 2D screens. We have a format which is multi-screen, which has more of a wraparound effect. And eventually, from the conversations we're having right now, because of the way we built the visuals in the first place, they are designed to eventually be turned into a 360 dome kind of experience. So obviously those venues are a little bit more difficult to come by, but we're talking to a few people at the moment about potentially putting that on, which should be a really, really exciting, I think, way to experience it.
One question that did pop into my head whilst looking at it earlier and trying to familiarise myself with the concept of it. We've spoken a lot on this podcast and in related subjects to do with Event Tech Talks and Event Tech Live about virtual and augmented reality. And something that we talked about on the podcast last year was the ability to maybe go to a live concert without actually being there through the use of a VR headset or something like that. This strikes me as something that would be brilliantly compatible with that emerging area of technology and live experience, that somebody could actually wear a VR headset and be part of the ANDRODES show without being in the actual venue.
Exactly, that's something we're really excited to start work on. And like you said, I was recently out in South by Southwest and we're talking to a lot of people about that concept, because for me VR is super exciting and I've tried all the headsets but it can be a little bit of an isolating experience. So where I'm really interested in VR and where it can go is how you can make it more social and less isolated. And there's a few companies out there that are really, really working on that angle. One of the companies I met out called the Wave VR, which is all about using music as a social tool in VR. And one of the ideas that we're working on at the moment is essentially to have the live event, whether that's in our standard format or in the dome format, and all of those kind of people on site, and also have a remote audience that can remote into a CGI environment and see the show from two different sides, and eventually find a way for those two groups of people to interact with each other during the show. Because one of the things I've been working on a lot with my team is how to make the whole experience more interactive and more immersive for the audience.
And what other ideas have you had on that sort of line? Are there crazy ideas that you've come up with that actually some of your team and the guys that are supporting you have actually been able to say, well, actually, we think we might be able to do that?
Yeah, that tends to be how it goes. I come up with a crazy idea and either I'm told that's potentially possible or that's definitely not possible, somewhere along that spectrum, and they get to work on it. One of the really cool things we worked on at South by Southwest, I was creative in residence at Hackathon. I don't know if you've ever been part of a hackathon before. It's a crazy, crazy event. Essentially, you get given a team of developers and coders and very nerdy people and 24 hours, and you give them an idea, and they workshop it overnight. And by the end of that 24 hours or 48 hours, they have usually a working prototype. So the idea we had for that was essentially, everybody's seen these wearable kind of LED bracelets, Coldplay and
sure, yeah.
And I said, well, we said, can we not do that with sound? So essentially what we built was a tool whereby I can play my keyboards or any of my instruments on stage, and I can broadcast that directly to all the phones in the audience. So I can, instead of having, your standard speaker sound sources, you'd have, 1,000 tiny little sound sources and be able to create some really cool 3D audio effects by using, geospatial technology plus sound plus layering and things like that to create a really different audio experience. So that's one of the things that we're still refining at the moment, hoping to introduce in some of the live shows soon. And then in terms of getting information in the other direction, one of the things I'd really like to introduce is a kind of choose your own adventure angle. So we'd crowdsource a decision from the audience at some point during the show, which would dictate a certain action or pick an ending, and eventually, I'd like to have a lot of different combinations and permutations of the show, which could occur on any given night.
You're listening to the Event Industry News podcast with N200 GES, and this evening we're talking to Helen Sartory about ANDRODES, which is this fantastic immersive live music cinematic experience that's been created by Helen and her team. And what was the phrase you used to describe it again, Helen? Just remind us of that. It was not cinematic.
Cinematronica.
Cinematronica.
Oh.
Fantastic.
Okay, yeah. Cinematic. I should trademark that, shouldn't I?
Absolutely, start using it often so that it can be traced back to you, because buzzwords like that tend to be picked up very, very quickly in these types of industries. So I definitely get that one copyrighted as soon as possible. We've been talking about the use of VR and AR and interactive technologies, and it sounds like you're very much somebody who's interested in that whole subject of interactivity. That said, does the show itself, if you are there as a live audience member, does it work best in a relatively intimate setting, or do you envisage that this is something that could work on a grand scale?
I've had various feedback from, people. Quite often people will come back and say, I want to see it again because I felt like I concentrated too much on the film or the visuals and not enough on what the performer was doing, or the music, or the other way around. I spent the whole time looking at a crazy machine and I didn't take in the story. So I think people experience it in a lot of different ways. We've done it to small audiences, we've done it to medium audiences. I haven't yet done it to a giant multi-thousand kind of head audience. I'd love to. Hopefully, it's in the future. It's a very big, intense, loud, all-encompassing experience. And it was originally designed for kind of big festival stages. So in my head, the bigger it gets, the better it should work. But that's yet to be proven.
When you go out to somewhere like South by Southwest, which has got event organisers from all over the world, and I suppose tying it in with our subject matter and our day-to-day subject matter, event industry news, looking at how things translate and can be adapted and deployed within the event industry. Have you had any contact with event organisers who are not necessarily live music event organisers, but who think that the concept of this would work brilliantly for their event? Because there are some fantastic private events that take place around the globe that are looking for new and innovative and groundbreaking ways to capture the imagination of their attendees. Have you had any contact with those type of people?
Yeah, definitely, and especially because of the way. I mean, if you don't know how South by works, it's two conferences in one. It's a week of tech industry conference and a week of music industry festival kind of stuff. So we definitely kind of sit in the middle of that, but the majority of the presentations, the panels, and the activities and the shows I was doing was in Tech Week. So the really interesting thing about that was to get a positive reaction from a non-music industry world, from the tech world, and yeah, it has already led to a couple of private shows. One, I just got back from LA, where we opened up the new 20,000 square foot facility, Upload VR. Have opened up in Marina del Rey. And that was a really great event because, these are people that are used to seeing crazy, crazy visuals, and they can see what the potential is for the show in terms of putting it in a 360 dome or creating a virtual remote version. So that's been really great. Having said that, I do think, it probably fits quite well with most corporate private events. It's a bit of a spectacle. It's a lot of fun. You don't need to, necessarily have any background knowledge. You just kind of turn up and dance. And so yeah, we are definitely hoping to pick up a few more of those types of events because they're a lot of fun. And then again, it also fits in with a lot of the audiovisual festivals and this, art installation gallery type stuff because it's got this slightly performative side to it beyond just straight music.
Has the technology side playing such an important role in the event and the concept itself, has it forced you to develop a quicker and a better and a deeper understanding of all of the other variables that go hand in hand with trying to deliver this type of show? And I suppose to put that question into context, when you were talking about this possibility of using mobile phones in the room to with this app that you developed at the hackathon, of transmitting audio signals and using that actually to deliver sound within the room, presumably that's got to rely on some sort of connectivity, either some sort of Wi-Fi network or a good cellular signal for that to actually be delivered. So coming up with the idea, I suppose, is just one part of it, but then there are so many different factors that you then have to understand to deliver that.
Usually it's coming up with the idea and thinking it sounds very simple and then being very confused for a couple of hours whilst a group of people in a room tell you why it's so difficult to build. And then by the end of the process, I have a semblance of understanding of how it works. With Crowdplay, the mobile phone audio app, for example, one of the hackathon sponsors out there was a company called PubNub, who have a broadcasting capability which can operate even on LTE, even on 3G. So we're not restricted by having to have everyone on a private network or having to have everyone got 4 bars on the phone. Stuff like that is really, really important because it gets things past concept into actual real life testing. So yeah, I had a bit of a background in tech. I used to live in San Francisco as a technology finance person. So I'd had a bit of a peek into that side of the world, and that's what got me kind of super interested in trying to use it for my musical projects. But I'm by no means a developer, and I'm just as confused as the rest of us when most of those conversations start happening.
As going back to what you mentioned earlier on in today's show, which was that you came from quite a traditional music background, a classical background. I'm curious to know, I suppose, 2 things. First of all, do you still have contact with people that you met while studying who are from that classical background, who think that you're some crazy woman who's gone off on some tangent?
Oh yeah, they all total nervous breakdown.
And I think you can come back to that. But the other thing, more pertinent question is, do you think that live music in general, whether that be electronic artists or guitar-based bands, need to better embrace technology, I suppose, to stay relevant to the next generation? Because I have 2 young children. I have 2 boys who are very keen on music themselves, but who have grown up in a generation of iPads and apps and constant connectivity to Wi-Fi, and their understanding of going to an event is going to an event and always having a phone or something in your hand to either video it or to tweet about it or to Snapchat about it. Do you think there needs to be a better embracing of that sort of technology in general in the music industry from how you've seen it?
I don't know. There's nothing wrong with doing things the old-fashioned way. I'm, a big advocate of that, and I still, go to classical music concerts, and I still play in an orchestra. But I think there's room for both. I think there's a lot of opportunities out there for musicians or event specialists or anybody in the creative arts if they want to embrace that side of things. But I think it's just about being creative with it. There are ways to deploy tech in a very, run-of-the-mill way, and there are ways to do it that really do service the art and what you're trying to achieve. So I think however much you want to engage with tech is, up to the performer, up to the creative. But if you are going to do it, try and do it in an original way. Try and do it in a way that people haven't experienced before, because that's what kind of where the novelty comes from.
What strikes me as slightly unusual as well is that as a musical artist, your show and your music can only really be accessed via this live experience, can't it? You can't record this and download it as an album in the traditional sense, because the whole concept is that you are there with the visuals and the music at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, if people come to the show and like the music and want to listen to it later on, I think that's something that is always available to them. I think for me, the way I wrote it was with the story in mind, with the visuals in mind. Just like some people sit and listen to film scores once they've seen a film, because it brings back memories and it means something to them. So having said that, there are a few tracks, a few scenes in the show, I should say, that were more, traditional structures that you might hear on the radio. But for the large majority of it, it's very much married to what's happening in the live environment. So it is a slightly different approach in that sense, yeah.
And going back to some of the actual elements that make up the show, people who go and look at photos or look at some of the video that's available of Androdes will see yourself performing, but they won't see you as we're seeing you now on the podcast. They will see you in this amazing, and I'm sure you won't mind me sort of making the comparisons for people who haven't seen you yet. Daft Punk style helmet that people may be familiar with. You know, it's shiny,
Yeah.
there are LEDs in there. You know, it's very much a sort of a robotic image that you're presenting, isn't there? And the visuals within the helmet make up part of the show as a massive element of it.
Yeah, I mean, partly out of shyness, it's a lot easier to get up on stage and perform if you're not looking people directly in the eye. So I know I'm not the only person that's gone down the helmet route just because of that aspect. Also, I did think it would be a bit weird if I turned up and did it in my pajamas. I mean, I wanted to look like something that belonged to the world. I'm not necessarily playing the role of the character in the film, but I definitely need to look like something that belongs there as I'm telling the story. So that's where this little baby comes in. She usually likes that, but today she's asleep.
And who was responsible for designing that element of the show, the costume itself?
So this helmet and the whole system behind it was developed by a very talented man called Mike Michelena, who's based in Spain. He actually got a bit of web notoriety from painstakingly recreating one of the Daft Punk helmets. And I don't know if you've ever tried to have an LED helmet built, but there's not that many people in the world that can do them. So when I saw this, I immediately pounced and said, how would you feel about doing a custom design with me based on this character that I've created? And this, it's a pretty impressive machine in terms of what it can do, and some of the future generations of the tech that are going to make it more autonomous in terms of the animations it can do and the things it can do. The costume itself, which I usually have to diet to get back into, was designed by a French designer called Emily Larger and built by a girl called Emily Spreadborough. And that is essentially my little fan homage to Tron, because I love Tron. It's basically, covered in LEDs and ELY, and it does all types of exciting things.
We've had a question come in via the live feed, and the question is: would there be a way that a corporate client, for example, could have a custom theme done? How difficult or easy, depending on how you want to answer it, would it be actually to create bespoke versions of this for some that it's feasible that some of the big tech companies could jump on this and want that the concept of the Androdes show delivered, but actually with visual content that's relevant to them? Is that something that you would consider doing in the future?
Yeah, I mean, visuals are some of the longest and most expensive things to build. So we spent a long time building the initial story, but having said that, it's fairly modular. So it breaks down roughly into two halves. Each half is 5 or 6 tracks each, and there's a different environment, a different look to each one. I think we cycle through about 6 different visual environments as we go through the story. So yeah, it's fairly easy to swap in and out if there's something customized that a client wanted to create and slot in. The nice thing about electronic music, even when you're doing it live, is it pretty much keeps to a strict time code. So we can very easily predict, what's happening with the visuals. At the moment, we haven't introduced live DJing, mostly because I already have quite a lot to do on stage. But something we'll do in the future to make some of that a little bit more improvisational. But yeah, it was designed to be fairly modular in terms of what we can swap in and out for different versions, making it shorter or longer, or whatever people want to do with it.
Just touching briefly on the amount of stuff that you do have to concentrate on and focus on stage. How long were the actual sort of production rehearsals, and how intense were those before you were able to actually deliver the show to an audience?
Well, that's a slightly sore subject because when I decided I wanted to design and build my own instrument, I was thinking in my mind that I'd get a month or 2 to rehearse. As it happens, with inevitable delays in any kind of build process, anything when you're getting outside of your brain into a physical version. I ended up with, I think, 6 days before the first show to memorize what essentially I built as a giant puppet. So I had to hit a lot of things in a row or wave my hand in a certain way. But it's a whole show is about 55 minutes. So I did have a brief panic attack about how on earth I was going to stuff it all into my brain. But somehow it did stick. And yeah.
And I guess like a lot of other live events of any kind, after 2 or 3 runs through it in front of the pressure of having the audience there, I guess it probably filters into your brain pretty quickly, even quicker than it would do in an intense rehearsal environment.
Yeah, definitely. And then there's always 1 or 2 moments that are your kind of sticky patches that you've got to really concentrate for. But then so the sense of relief when you're on the home straight and you can relax a little bit. Yeah, it's a really, really fun way to play live music. So, and that's kind of part of the reason I designed it. It's quite a bit selfish, I guess. I think it's a lot more fun than playing with decks. But I would say that because I'm not a good DJ.
The concept of the show and it is very much in its infancy, I guess. It was only performed live in February for the first time, so you probably have a very long distance to run with this. But in your mind, is there already part 2 and part 3 and sequels to this, or just simply an extension to the story that you've got at the moment?
Yes, we've already been asked, is there a sequel? It's left on a little bit of a cliffhanger. Depending, the story itself is designed because in a way that you can engage on in different levels. Because I understand what it's like being in a live music event. You might go off and get a beer, you might go off to the toilet. You're not necessarily paying attention 100% of the time like you would in cinema. So it's designed that if you really, really are paying attention, there's a lot of detail and there are a lot of Easter eggs you can pick up on. And if you're not paying attention so much and you're just there to dance, there's a lot of cool stuff going on that you'll still understand it. It's simplistic enough that you'll still understand. Having said that, like I said, there is a bit of a cliffhanger at the end. I've left it open in case Annie, that's the name of the robot in the story, comes back for another round. And yes, we were having some conversations out in LA about what the sequel might look like. So I have to get thinking about that.
And what does the schedule look like from here on in? We're approaching the festival season. Have you already talked to any of the music festivals, and where are the live performances going to take place over the next 3 to 6 months?
Sure, yeah. I mean, given that we launched in February, we were a little bit late to get into this summer's festival season. Some of the smaller ones, maybe towards the end, September. But we've done 10 shows now, 5 in London, 5 in the States. And I'm back in London now, kind of taking stock, kind of tweaking a few bits and pieces, road testing everything. So next time we go out, it's even bigger and even better. We are looking at a few, private shows over the summer, and then eventually, towards the end, October time, what we'd really like to do is do a site-specific build, probably somewhere in London, where we can do a fully immersive evening event. So it's not just the show; it's kind of setting up a whole environment that's based in this digital CGI world to really, make it more immersive and more engaging.
Because I see this personally as this is going to be something that's of interest not just to people who love live music and a live artistic experience, but there are loads of people who watch this podcast and who listen to this podcast who are involved in the technology side of the events industry, who I would urge to hop over and have a look at this and find out as much as you can about it, because I think there are lots of elements within the ANDRODES concept that actually translate into other live event environments, and that could be something as traditional as a business conference. There are elements and stuff that you're doing with the show that I think a lot of people are using in other types of event as well. And I don't know, has anybody picked your brains already about certain elements of it to try and sort of take inspiration for stuff that's totally different?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. The way I kind of what I wanted from the show was to create something that was more inclusive than your average rave or your average dance music experience, because there's a lot of people out there that enjoy live music and enjoy electronic music that don't necessarily want to go rave all night. So it's much more tailored towards sci-fi fans or gaming fans or just film fans, as well as the traditional kind of live music. So we're talking. We have had a few conversations with people. It's fired ideas off into, like I was saying, into immersive experience, but also short form VR. A few different kind of spin-off ideas in terms of how the character itself might exist outside of the show. One of the really fun ideas we were talking with one of the larger labels is creating a permanent virtual world where all of your favorite artists might exist together, that you can go and visit at any time, and making any one of those characters that you can go and interact with. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different things you can do with it. I'm always open to ideas. I love to hear what it kind of makes people think of when they see it.
For people who do want to find out more about Androdes and about yourself, give us some of the website addresses, social media handles that people can use to find out more about you.
Sure. The website's www.androdes.com, and that's got a little quick trailer that gives you probably a better sense of what it looks like and what it's like, better than me rambling. And we do update that for upcoming shows. If more up to date is probably the Instagram and Twitter, both of which are Androdes Live. And I have just been forced to make a Facebook, which I'm very, very bad at updating, but I'm going to get much better at that. And that is also Androdes Live. So any of those mediums, you'll get the updates. And
to clarify for those of you listening to the audio version of the podcast, which is available via iTunes, that's ANDRODES. Androdes Live is the social media handles, I think, for Twitter, and androdes.com is the website address. So head over there. You have been listening to the Event Industry News podcast, and today we've been joined by Helen Sartory, who, under the artistic name of Sartory, has created this amazing. Give us the buzzword one more time so that you can get your copyright on it.
Cinematronica. The immersive
Cinematronica.
electronic music experience of your dreams.
There we go. Head over and find out more about it. It's been a fascinating discussion, and one of those discussions that really could have gone on for hours and hours, but unfortunately we only have so much time with the podcast. But Helen, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
This is the Event Industry News podcast. The podcast, as we said at the top of the show, is very kindly sponsored by N200 GES, our smart event solution partner. For more information on N200 and its smart event solutions, please head over and visit n200.com. If you've been listening to this live stream or tuning into the live stream this evening, don't forget that you can download all of the podcasts as audio versions via iTunes, and you can also go to eventindustrynews.com at any time to re-watch the video recordings of all of the podcasts. Also, don't forget about the brand new eventindustrynews.com app, which will keep you notified of all the latest content going up onto the website and what's happening in the industry. Once again, thanks very much to our guest Helen Sartory this evening. My name's James Dixon. You've been watching the Event Industry News podcast, and we'll see you next week. Good night.